Hi, this is Debbie, and today I have a little more rough and ready video to share. I'll chat more about the video later, but before I get on to talking about the card, I wanted to mention that there's a blog hop with giveaway on my blog to go with this video to celebrate Altenew's 4th birthday. I'll tell you more about that at the end of the video. Okay, so you probably know how much I love watercolours, and I'm always trying to find ways to incorporate them into my crafting. For this card, I'm using the Wildflower Garden set from Altenew, and I wanted to create the feeling of a windswept English cottage garden with a riot of flowers growing together. I thought how I'd take a photograph of this garden with the focus in the foreground, but then blurring as the flowers were further away. To achieve this look, I taped a piece of watercolour card to a board and wet it with clear water. I loosely applied a wash of green and blue for the background, and then when that was dry, applied a slightly deeper layer of colour, and then used a piece of kitchen roll to mop up some of the colour and create a textured background. I arranged a few stems from the Wildflower Garden set on top of the watercolour piece, which I'd placed in the Tim Holtz stamp platform. I closed the door of the platform to adhere the stamps to the door, and then wet the watercolour paper with a clear wash of water. I used a paintbrush and some Daniel Smith watercolours to paint the stems, and then stamp them onto the wet paper. The watercolour does what watercolour paints do best, and blended with the water to give the faintest impression of stems as if they were in the distance. I dried the panel, and then stamped the stems again with the residual paint left from the first impression. As the paper is now dry, the stems were stamped with slightly more definition, but equally still with a nice loose and finished look. I moved on to stamping a few flower heads in the same way, wetting the paper first and stamping with paint, drying the paper and stamping the residual paint. This is perhaps a good time to chat about the video. Usually I use a video camera I have attached to my ceiling, but often I find the footage from it really washed out and not as clear as I'd like. So I tried setting up the photography camera on a tripod above my desk. The quality and colour I think is more in line with real life, but I couldn't see where the camera was filming all the time, and so at times I'm a little off screen and at other times more zoomed in than would have been ideal. I guess I'll keep working on getting the best setup for my videos. With all the really wet work done, I removed the watercolour card from the board and placed it back into the stamp platform. From now on, I'm stamping with watercolour onto the dry background, and this combined with more concentrated paint results in more defined stems and flowers for the foreground. All the time I'm using the brush to paint the images before stamping. I'm also keeping the brush to hand and making adjustments, such as mopping up too much paint, adding in other colours for interest, such as the coral to the centre of the yellow flowers, pink to the purple flowers, and a little blue to some of the stems and leaves. All of these little adjustments I feel help to give the look of watercolour to this card. However, I'm trying not to overdo it, as I don't want for this to get too detailed, but to keep that loose, airy feel. I felt that was as much stamping as I could do without it getting too busy, and so I dried the panel off and then splattered with some of the leftover paint, and also a good splattering with a solution of Perfect Pearls. As a final touch, I used a brush and added in some colour to the flower centres. I also used some dilute colours to fill in gaps and add a few more impressions of flowers and leaves in the background. I don't know if you've ever noticed, but things which are further away are paler and washed out, and so using a dilute mix of paint automatically tells the eye that these things are more distant. I stamped a sentiment from the Wildflower Garden set in clear embossing ink on slate card and sprinkled with white embossing powder before heat setting. I then used one of the handmade tag dies from Altenew and the mini blossom die cutting machine to die cut an oval tag. I then trimmed the watercolour piece to 4 by 5¼ inches, which is just slightly smaller than an A2 card. I added foam adhesive squares to the back of the tag and strung it with garden twine, which I then wrapped around the panel and secured on the back. I mounted the panel to a Neenah Desert Storm £100 card base with a generous application of foam adhesive. This, in addition to the sturdy card base, ensures the card stays nice and flat for mailing. I picked out a variety of toning sequins and held those in place with range of multimedia matte, and that completes this card using watercolours to stamp a wildflower garden. I'll leave links in the YouTube description below to the products that I've used today, as well as a link to the coordinating blog post over at limedoodledesign.com. And that is where you'll find all the details of the blog hop and the giveaways as part of the Altenew 4th birthday celebrations. I want to thank you for joining me today, and if you've enjoyed this tutorial, I'd be delighted if you subscribe to this channel. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.